Welcome into the Leaving Eden podcast. Welcome in. So last week we discussed the situation in the Rodriguez family where Timothy Rodriguez admitted to committing some serious domestic abuse against his wife. Sadie is your host. She is a cult expert, cult survivor. She is also a certified domestic abuse trafficking advocate in the state of Oregon. And she actually knows quite a bit about the topic of why people who survive fundamentalism or people who were raised in fundamentalism are more susceptible to end up in domestic abuse situations. And today she is going to tell us all about that. My name is Gavi. If you're not familiar with this show, this is the Leaving Eden podcast. We talk about cults, religion, fundamentalism.
Okay, so I'm gonna just talk a lot in this episode, I think. What I'm talking about today is my own research. We have some research about domestic and sexual violence. It's predictably not the thing that we have the most research about, but it is something that gets studied in an academic context. What I noticed when I was going through some of those studies and some of the really established best practices for working with survivors of domestic violence is, number one, abusive and coercive relationships follow a very predictable pattern. What's really interesting is that the pattern that they follow is so similar to the pattern of cult-like or religious abuse. You can find the bite model in domestic violence relationships. Clearly, it's not a stretch. It's not difficult to put the pieces together. It's actually really, really blatant. And it's to the point where some of the most common tactics used by cult leaders to subdue and control cult members end up being some of the most common tactics that abusers and exploiters use to control the victim survivors of their abuse. So we're talking about stuff like on a very basic level, stuff like sleep deprivation. Something that I learned as I was learning more about abusive interpersonal relationships and intimate partner violence is that sleep deprivation is often used in those relationships to bring a greater level of control over the victim. So the way that looks, we've talked so many times about the way that looks in cults, right? In the Independent Baptist movement, it was, you got to work all the time, you got to go to church all the time, you got to have lots of family time, you got to pray all the time, you got to go soul winning all the time, you don't really have time to sleep, and very much glorifying people who slept, less glorifying people who took care of their own needs, less to get to a point of maximum productivity, maximum output for the machine of the Independent Baptist Church. In abusive relationships, this more often looks like somebody starting a repetitive fight with their partner right before their partner goes to sleep. And that may be something that a lot of people in listening have experienced. The partner who is abusive may portray themselves to be really calm and loving throughout an evening, acting like, well, definitely everything's okay. And it shakes up the nervous system of the person who's living in an abusive relationship. So maybe in this scenario, your partner always starts a fight with you around 6:45 p.m. because of something regarding dinner, something regarding their day at work, there's something you didn't do well enough, a chore you were supposed to do that you didn't do, whatever it is, you know that they predictably almost always start a fight around 6:45 p.m. And on this particular night, they don't. 6:45 p.m. comes and goes and everything is super reasonable. They're being super nice to you. You sit down to watch some TV and you're thinking in your mind, well, they're going to explode at me any minute. This is not good. This is not normal. This is the time of night where they explode at me, they get verbally abusive, or they get physically violent with me. This is what happens at 6:45 at night. And when it's not happening, it's very unsettling to me, and this doesn't feel right, and I don't feel okay. Then, after waiting that amount of time, often an abusive partner will wait for their partner to try to experience some calm and peace, watch TV, do the nighttime chores, whatever it is they're going to do, get ready for bed, and then just as their partner is just about to get in bed and fall asleep, that's when they start the fight. The effect this has, and by the way, I want to say I firmly believe that people who are abusive can do this and know that they're doing it, and they can do it and not know that they're doing it. That's something that I'm just really, a really strong belief of mine is that can be and often is both. People don't understand that that's how they're affecting their partner, and there's often a base level understanding somewhere deep down in their soul that they do know exactly what they're doing. Another thing that I want to say, I guess, while I'm on the topic is it doesn't matter if it's accidental or purposeful. It doesn't matter if abuse is, like, there's no justification for abuse, but it doesn't matter if you can see a reason. Like in the case of Timothy Rodriguez, I think we see exactly where his abuse came from. I think there's very much a reason for him behaving that way. And seeing a reason or not seeing a reason does not need to be the decider of a person staying or leaving. That's not really relevant to whether a person should stay or whether a person should leave. It's not really relevant to whether a person is physically somewhat safe in that relationship or not. So I really encourage people to get away from the idea of like seeing a reason. Well, I know there is a reason that he treats me that way. That may be very much true, and it shouldn't be a factor in whether you stay or go. But it doesn't really affect your safety whether there's a reason or not. So as I was studying domestic violence, I started noticing all of these tactics that are really similar in domestic violence and abusive relationships and cult relationships, specifically between cult leaders and followers, but also between the cult itself and the followers. I started noticing the bite model all over the place. Sleep deprivation is a form of behavior control. Another thing we might talk about is information control. Gavi, do you want to give like a really, really brief, what's information control inside a cult environment?
Yeah, so information control can be as simple as, this is a good source of information, this is a bad source of information. This source of information is pre-approved by our cult, by our organization, and outside media is bad. You shouldn't listen to it because they don't understand us, they have an agenda against us. It can also be, this person that you know, this person is a bad influence. You shouldn't spend time with them, you shouldn't hang out with them because they don't have your best interest at heart the way that we have your best interest at heart. So information control, also it relies on in-group versus out-group. So you have an in-group within which everything is safe, everyone who is part of the in-group is a safe person and you can trust anything that they say. And in the out-group, anything that comes out of there should immediately be treated at least with suspicion, and you shouldn't trust it. And there's also another element where leadership can use a system to reward people for telling on each other, can reward and punish people for misdeeds, but it can also reward people for informing leadership on other people.
And literally every single thing that you just said is not only something that happens in abusive relationships, everything you just said is common in abusive relationships.
Right, like, so if you have a friend who you tell about what's going on in your relationship and they're like, you need to leave that man. You're like, well, I'm thinking about it. And then you go to have the conversation with your partner who's saying all these things and you're like, I need to leave because I don't like, the way that you're treating me is bad, and you get to do that. And then they say to you, well, who have you been talking to? Has this person been in your ear?
This is just because you've been talking to Susan, and we all know how Susan is. So then they will go to exactly like I was taught to laugh at millions of years in relation to dinosaurs. You know how Susan is. Susan's just batty. Susan's just crazy. Susan is always causing trouble. Susan's never liked me because I used to go out with her sister's best friend's neighbor.
They can say, well, did somebody tell you that you and because you're approaching this from because this is serious to you and you're approaching this from a good faith perspective, you're not going to lie to them about this. If somebody actually did tell you, you need to leave this situation, you're going to say, yes, this person told me that I need to leave. Or you're going to say, yes, somebody told me, and they're going to be like, who was it? I want to know. And they're going to berate you until you give the information to them. This is also why, and this is very difficult, that if you know somebody who is in one of these, who is in an abusive situation, sometimes the hardest thing to do is the thing that you have to do, which is not tell them to leave. And you have to often wait for them to make the decision for themselves, because if you tell them what decision they need to make, then it can backfire and lead to other problems that end up with you getting cut out of their life.
Right, and how many times have we talked about that exact scenario with cults? You can't tell somebody, hey, this is bad for you, you need to leave. Because the same will happen with a cult leader, with a representative of a cult, with a religious leader, whoever. Well, did somebody tell you that this church isn't healthy for you? Poor thing, the devil's really attacking you and giving you all these negative ideas in your mind, and I wish that hadn't happened to you, so that kind of fake sympathy.
This person, they don't understand our love.
Mm-hmm. I won't take too long on the bite model, but I want to point out that also thought control and emotion control absolutely happen in abusive, coercive, controlling relationships. Maybe the most obvious way that I would say is, I can't believe that you would think that I'm abusive. You just need to think more positively. You're listening to all those negative people and they're filling your mind with garbage. Or, let's see. I can't believe that you would be so selfish that you would think the way I treat you is abuse. I treat you like a princess. So all of those are thought control and emotion control. Here's the thought that you are thinking is that I'm bad. And the thought that I want you to replace it with is that I treat you like a princess. It's one-to-one direct thought control. And emotion control. I can't believe you would think that. I can't believe that you would feel that. Or you must be stupid if you believe that. You must be stupid. You don't know the meaning of love. Like, all of those things are really, really common in abusive relationships, and also directly related to bite model, thought control, emotion control, information control, behavior control. So I started noticing that these things run together. And because of that, I wanted to study more, and I wanted to find out if I can make a link to religious trauma, religious abuse actually causing or leading to later experiences of domestic and sexual violence. So I'm presenting a more full version of this down the road, and when I get to the point that I've done that whole presentation, I may be able to present the whole thing on the podcast. I just have to check with licensing stuff. But I'm going to go through little bits of that today and talk about some of the connections that I found.
Do we want to go to break before we go into this?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I'll go get Chuck more cereal.
The Leaving Eden podcast is, of course, made possible by our amazing, incredible audience over on Patreon at patreon.com/Leaving Eden podcast. Our patrons get access to extended, uncensored, ad-free versions of the episodes. They also come out early. If you want to check that out, you can go over to our Patreon and join up. Our I Gave It All to Your patrons. Your names are Kathleen Moncrief, Melissa Manown, Todd Dale, and Jess. Thank you guys so much for supporting the show. Our Faith Promise Missions to your patrons. Your names are Jessica Tambo, Hope Norum, Linda Morgan, Eleanor Donahue, Jonna, Swamp Wook, Brittany, Chad Harris, Madeline Cusick, Rob the Methodist, Hannah Ross, Stephanie Johnson, Elizabeth Struther, Tara McNamara, Tiziana Buberini, Janine Collin, Dora J, Madeline Antrim, Steve and Amy, 1010, Chris, Yafi Lavova, Right Away 13, Rob the Dis Method, Perdition City Station, Helly R, God's Wiener Dog, Backwoods Barbie 31, I Am June, and Kellen Rouse. Thank you guys so much for supporting the show. If you want to support the show, you can head over to patreon.com/Leaving Eden podcast. Thank you guys so much for your help. And now back to the episode.
I want to start with a quote from a paper that I found that I thought was really interesting. The paper is called A Commentary on Religion and Domestic Violence. It is by Reverend Dr. Maria M. Fortune with Salma Abukadieri, I think, and Rabbi Mark Drach. So it is a Christian or religious figures from Christianity, Islam, and Judaism who got together to write this paper about how religion ought to support domestic violence survivors. And a quote that I found really meaningful from that was, "Cultural competency in addressing domestic violence must include some awareness and appreciation of religion and faith traditions." When I give this presentation, I'm talking more towards people who are already involved in domestic violence services and how it would be ideal for them to How do you treat religious domestic violence survivors when they come into your place of work, when they come into your service center? How do you talk to them? Best practices like not ever saying you need to leave your church. And I hope that it'll be really helpful. The thing that is kind of new in this presentation is that I'm presenting religious trauma. So for these people who are already involved in social services, already really familiar with intersectionality, I'm presenting religious trauma as an additional intersection. So we know about intersections of race, class, gender, sexuality, wealth, many different intersections, education. There are dozens of different intersections that influence how a person is able to go about through the world. They all affect each other. I think that religious trauma is another one of these things that can affect a person as they go through the world. So I want to talk about how does religious trauma make people more likely to experience domestic violence? So some of the causes, we're going to talk about causes first. Okay. So cause number one, religious groups often have harmful and false teachings about AFAB bodies. So we're talking about people who are assigned female at birth, people who are socialized as women, and of course within most religious groups that are strict enough to have these really negative teachings, they are also strict enough to really not believe in the existence of trans people at all. I'm still going to use AFAB and AMAB in this presentation because I think it's the most clear, but with the caveat that these groups are exclusively classifying people who are assigned female at birth as women and exclusively classifying people who are assigned male at birth as men. So some of these negative and harmful teachings about AFAB bodies, things we've talked about a ton on the show. Your body is a temptation to men. Your body is irresistible, so you must dress modestly. SA is the victim's fault because you tempted him, and the hymen is a vacuum seal for freshness. These are teachings that are baked into especially American evangelical Christianity. I know that there are other religious groups that do take part in these teachings, that do promote these teachings. I'm mostly speaking from the experience of my own, like growing up within American evangelicalism. We're setting up why religion makes people more likely to experience domestic violence, and part of that why is these teachings. So we have negative teachings about AFAB bodies, negative teachings about AFAB sexuality. So these are things like women don't desire sex, women don't enjoy sex, sex is for marriage only, consent is not necessary in marriage, birth control is a sin because it shows a lack of faith in God. Like all the things that we've kind of heard over and over and over again. The third cause I want to get into is religious groups enforcing rigid gender roles or more stringent rules for women. These are teachings like men should be the head of the household, women are not competent to make decisions, women should follow their husbands, it's a sin for women to gossip or complain, women are not allowed to teach men. I know that these are things that we've talked about literally 100 times on this show. In the context of why it makes people more susceptible to domestic violence, the reason is that these teachings set up the necessary conditions for abuse. Last week on the episode, I was referencing the book Becoming Allies, and that book is, I think, an excellent resource on this. That book talks about how abuse within a relationship requires a couple of factors. So the first factor that it requires is a true belief that the abuser is better than, more powerful than, or otherwise has the right to treat the other person however they want to. People who abuse, and I'm talking about everything from a boss who just really enjoys bossing their employees around and is a pain in the butt to work for, to an abusive parent, a cult leader, an abusive spouse or domestic partner. All of those people have something in common, and the thing that they have in common is that they believe that they have a right to behave the way that they do. They have a justification in their mind. I think this is something that's really helpful to understand as we're trying to understand abusive people. One of the best known and I think most helpful books on domestic violence is a book called Why Does He Do That? By author Lundy Bancroft. That one you can get a PDF online if you Google search for it. People want to know, why does my partner behave this way? People want to know, why does my parent behave this way? People want to know, why does my religious leader behave this way? What are the most common emotional reactions to experiencing this kind of violence? Is this just desperate need to know, okay, but why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? What makes this person that I really believe I love act like this? So the cause that's really, really important to talk about that is in common both to religious abuse and domestic abuse is that feeling of entitlement. A person who abuses, I think, can feel entitled because they think they're chosen by God. We would see that in the Jack Scott case, right?
Yeah.
He literally said, Jesus wants us to be together forever, so we should do that. That's the same sense of entitlement as a non-religious abusive partner who says, well, my partner just really, they're really stupid. They're not very good at making decisions, so I have to help them out. Or a religious abusive partner or religious abusive system that says, well, you are a woman and therefore you're not capable of making good decisions and a man should make decisions for you. It's all the same thing.
Especially I could see that if you're in a religious system where, or a version of evangelical Christianity where it's very focused on what is the Holy Spirit telling you directly? Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, what is the voice of the Holy Spirit? What does the Holy Spirit say to you? What does that sound like? And they tell you, oh, it's like a still small voice, or that's the idea, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're the right kind of narcissist, or you're somebody who thinks that you're just, different, you might think that just your interior monologue is the Holy Spirit talking to you. And so
right.
Any idea that you have that you think, well, people should just be made to do this thing, I know what's right, I know what's good, becomes validated. But then your interior monologue, because you're told that's the Holy Spirit, it's like, no, you know what's right, you know what's good, not I know what's right, I know what's good. It switches to the second person,
right.
Not first person. Then because you're told that's the Holy Spirit, that's not just you, then you might think any whim that you have, any idea that you have is a good idea and a rational idea.
Yeah, because the Holy Spirit told you to do it.
So I could see that if you were a person who also had abusive tendencies, this could be a compounding problem.
Right. And I think this is something that's really important to dig in on when we are talking about interpersonal abuse, because something that we see a lot with survivors of abuse, and this goes very well, almost a one-for-one comparison, survivors of religious abuse with survivors of domestic violence. It is just hard for people to believe that their abuser knew what they were doing or did it on purpose. You can see this when I talked about Jack Scott. When Jack Scott initially got caught and there was going to be an investigation and everything was kind of hitting the fan and things were really crazy, my reaction to my dad was, well, he wouldn't do that, or if he did, he wouldn't do it on purpose. And the reaction of so many people, I grew out of that pretty quick, but the reaction of so many people over time to the Jack Scott scandal has been, well, that girl tempted him. He would not make that decision of his own accord. He wouldn't choose that. That girl tempted him, or that's not really what happened. Or abusers, the idea that abusers don't abuse on purpose. I see this literally constantly working with domestic violence survivors as well. It's the idea that, yes, I understand what this person has done to me is inherently abusive and wrong, but I don't think they knew it was wrong when they were doing it. This is exactly actually what we were just talking about Jill Rodriguez saying, right? I recognize, she was saying that she recognizes that her husband David's actions in the early part of their marriage were abusive and wrong, but it wasn't his fault because he wasn't raised in a Christian home, and how was he supposed to know any better? It's literally that, over and over and over again. What I'm starting to study is that it doesn't matter. I think I said this right at the end of last week's little clip as well. It doesn't matter if people knew better or didn't know better, or were set up to fail or weren't set up to fail, or had were abused themselves as a child. It doesn't actually, it's where it is completely valid and meaningful is in that person's individual therapy. Where it's not valid and meaningful is in the decision for other people to make about their safety. You are not more safe with a person who has been physically abusive, but you know why, than you are with a person who's been physically abusive and you don't know why. You are not more safe with a person who has been abusive and realizes that they're hurting you than you're not more safe with a person who doesn't realize they're hurting you than a person who does realize they're hurting you. You're not more safe or less likely to die with someone who says that they hate you, that they love you, instead of saying that they hate you. Those do not affect the actual statistics of domestic violence. And I think that it's totally valid to focus on that when you are working with someone who has been abusive and wants to change. That's the appropriate context for these questions and these ideas to come up. Not in the context of whether a survivor should or shouldn't leave. It has literally nothing to do with that and can really affect people's safety.
It feels different to the person, but it doesn't change the risk factors.
Right. It doesn't. So something that I do in my job, and this is an additional trigger warning because it can be really heavy. Then something that I do a lot at work in my day job is called a lethality assessment. Gabi, do you know anything about a domestic violence lethality assessment?
No.
The one that I use is about a 25-point questionnaire. And it feels really similar to like the mental health questionnaire that you might get at your doctor's office, right? Your doctor might say, have you lost interest in things that you used to enjoy? Do you feel tired or unmotivated all the time? Do you have thoughts of wanting to harm yourself? Like you might take that little questionnaire when you go into the doctor's office. The lethality assessment functions a lot like that. It's just a list of questions. And when you have answered all the questions, there's a calculation to provide a relative risk of death due to domestic violence. It's, that's a tough thing to go through with somebody. They're tough questions to ask. It's not my favorite day when I come home from work and have to do lethality assessments, but they are. So this domestic violence lethality assessment is a scientific document. It's not based on feelings. It's based on real statistics. Another thing that I was peripherally involved with this year at work was the Multnomah County Domestic Violence Lethality Report for 2025. That recently came out, I think, a couple months ago. I didn't contribute to that report, but a lot of people I know did through the Domestic Violence and Sex Trafficking Community Advisory Board. Yeah, the Multnomah County releases a lethality report every year that talks about total cases of domestic violence, which ones led to a death, which unsolved deaths are most likely linked to domestic violence. The link hasn't been found yet. And also statistics like what percent of lethalities from domestic violence occurred in households that own a firearm? What percent of fatalities from domestic violence occur in households where a firearm was the weapon of death for that person? So we have research statistics yearly checks on what makes a domestic violence situation more likely to result in death. So this is not, it's not just a feeling scale. It is actually a very scientific scale about what makes things more likely to result in death. And because we have that scale and because we have these yearly reports and we study them compared to the scale, we actually do know what is more likely to result in the death of a domestic violence survivor or domestic violence victim. And that's why I'm telling you that whether the abuser knows that they're being abusive or not, whether or not they say that they love the victim, whether or not they're trying to be a better person, whether or not they were abused themselves as a child, none of those things are factored into the lethality assessment. And I know because I do lethality assessments. So when I tell you that somebody like Timothy Rodriguez, who absolutely was set up to fail and had some horrible abuse in his childhood and is able to verbalize that he loves Heidi and doesn't want to be this person anymore, is not statistically less likely to cause major damage to her than any other abuser who doesn't have those factors. The factors that I do see protecting her are that he is, and not to get too much into the topic of last week's episode, I think he shouldn't have posted this on Facebook. I think it was a violation of her privacy and a bad thing overall. I do think the fact that he posted it makes it slightly less likely for her to come to major bodily harm. In the long run, she is statistically more physically safe because this happened, even though shouldn't have happened and is a huge privacy boundary violation. But yeah, all of that to say, we know some of the actual causes of domestic violence, and we know the statistics of what cause a person to be more likely to die from domestic violence. And knowing those statistics, I think, is really helpful and powerful.
Yeah. Do you want to go to break and then we'll move on to the next part?
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
So we talked about some causes, some reasons that religious abuse sets people up for domestic violence. We talked about the causes. I want to talk about the effects. So we talked about views of people as being sinful and worthless, and women not being able to be in leadership, women not being able to think for themselves, women's bodies being black holes of sin. What's the actual effect of that is the next thing that I want to talk about. So we know that religious abuse tells women that they are temptations, that they are a problem, that they are incompetent, incapable. Religious abuse tells all children that they are worthless, totally sinful, filled with evil, possessed by Satan, disgusting abominations to God, destined for hell, born sinful, deceitful at heart, untrustworthy, and vessels for God to use. And we know from studying religious abuse that this causes persistent feelings of worthlessness, feeling bad or broken, suppression of desire of all kinds, inability to trust oneself, inability to trust others, and depersonalization and derealization. These are predictable causes, or predictable effects of children being told that they are bad and broken. Effects specifically on women, by which I mean AFAB people. So effects specifically on AFAB people are educational abuse and neglect, lack of job skills and training, no resume, job history, leads to financial abuse by the church, financial abuse by a partner, acceptance of emotional abuse, acceptance of physical abuse, intense shame around sex and sexuality, feelings of total disconnection, dissociation from one's body, feeling bad or broken when experiencing sexual desire, and extreme guilt over normal sexual desires or experiences. I think it's a good place to point out that everyone who experiences religious abuse experiences these effects. The reason I was talking about intersectionality up at the top of the presentation, when we treat religious abuse as an additional intersection, we see how it plays with other factors in a person's life. All people exposed to religious abuse are susceptible to feeling bad, broken, unworthy abominations to God. That affects everybody regardless of what their gender, sexuality, race, class, education, wealth, any of those other things. All of those people are affected by feeling bad and broken and feeling like they can't trust themselves and feeling like they are worthless or their worth is only in their religion. AFAB people are affected by all of that, and it's magnified because they have all these additional negative teachings about AFAB people. People of color are affected by all of that up in the top layer, and it's magnified because they are bombarded with teachings about the curse of Ham and why rock music is bad, and they could be very likely to be treated as second-class citizens within their own church community, in many cases within religious abuse. So if everybody's experiencing this top layer of abuse, and then it's magnified for women and it's magnified for people of color, then it's magnified twice for women of color. Mm-hmm. And it's magnified 3 times for LGBTQ women of color. The magnification is kind of a logarithmic function. It compounds. It's compound interest that affects people in a very real way in their life. So the reason that it is more likely to lead to domestic violence, so there are a few reasons that all of this religious abuse and all of these negative beliefs about oneself can lead to interpersonal violence, domestic violence in the future in that person's life. Number one, and I'm going to send you a link for this. This comes from a Psychology Today article. Children who are exposed to domestic violence are more likely to experience domestic violence in their adult relationships. And I think that that makes sense, right? Yeah. People, if you see it growing
behavior
up,
normalized, then that becomes a model.
What's really interesting, and you'll find it in that Psychology Today article if you check it out, is that that does not just apply on the side of the victim or survivor. That applies on both sides. People who are exposed to domestic violence growing up are more likely to become the victim of domestic violence as an adult. And people who are exposed to domestic violence growing up are also more likely to become the perpetrator of domestic violence as an adult. I wrote this presentation months ago. This is like a very commonly cited statistic that we know is correct. And also that feels so relevant given the situation with Tim Rodriguez right now.
Yeah.
It does. I think we've already gone through this statement in regards to all of these things. Things can be not your fault and also still be your responsibility. And that's actually really difficult when that comes down on you like that. And also, it's still your responsibility because millions of people experience domestic violence in their homes as a child and do not go on to become the perpetrator of domestic violence as an adult. I think it is really it's really interesting to know that this normalization does lead to actual violence in real people's lives. Like, this isn't just a statistic. This is very much a real thing that is happening in real time as we are talking. So people who have experienced domestic violence as a child are more likely to experience domestic violence in their adult relationships, both as victim, survivor, or perpetrator. Also, people who have experienced domestic violence in one relationship are more likely to experience domestic violence in subsequent relationships. I think the reason that this ties back to religious abuse is something that I've said a couple times on this podcast. The more serious version is when I say my first abusive relationship was with God, or the silly version of that is that my daddy issues come from God the Father. But that's true. It's true though. My premise is that people who experience extreme religious abuse are effectively experiencing domestic violence. And we know statistically, scientifically, that people who experience domestic violence as children are more likely to grow up to be involved in it. People who experience domestic violence in one relationship are more likely to grow up to or continue on to experience it in other relationships. So I think that in itself makes it more likely.
That's really interesting. So you're saying that what you're saying is that because these two things function in the same way, and because we know one causes this outcome, then because these two things function in the same way, then the other one should cause it too. So this is theoretically like a hypothesis based on...
It is a hypothesis, and I think it's a really strong hypothesis because of how great the similarity. So thing A functions like this, thing B functions like this. The similarity of the functioning is so incredibly high, like way higher than even I expected it to be. The input is strong. So we're putting things into this like a hypothesis machine, right? We put in, well, thing A and thing B function really similarly to each other. So I think if thing A causes outcome X, then thing B is also going to cause outcome X. The reason that I think this hypothesis is really valid is because, number one, the similarities between thing A and thing B are huge, are way higher than I even expected them to be. The other reason is that outcome X is seen over and over and over again in cases of both thing A and thing B, with the outcome being experiencing domestic violence, being more likely to experience domestic violence. We know, because we've studied it, that that is the likely outcome of experiencing domestic violence as a child or experience it in a previous relationship. We also see that exact same correlation hold up with religious trauma survivors. It is anecdotal because we haven't done a full study. I would love to know if anybody who has been active in the religious trauma field does not feel that religious abuse growing up makes you more likely to experience domestic violence as an adult.
Here's a thought for you. I don't know if you're ready to close on this episode.
I'm almost, yeah.
When we talk about cults, when we talk about groups that use like the same methods of authoritarian control, the four ways that the four types of things that we talk about: cults, abusive domestic partnerships, and you've established these two function the same. The other two that function the same as those two are criminal syndicates and authoritarian regimes. So while maybe the study hasn't been done on whether or not domestic abuse is more or less likely with religious trauma survivors. You could probably look to whether domestic abuse is more or less likely depending on the relative freedom of the country within, where the country, state, locality, whatever, within where somebody lives. So if, is this corollary work the same with a different manifestation of the bite model's coercive control?
I think that's really interesting, and I would definitely love to look into that.
Because there's probably much more data, like if you go, what is the rate of domestic abuse by country? There's probably much more detailed data about that than whether or not an individual person grew up in a religiously abusive or controlling household, because that's very difficult. That's more difficult to determine than where does somebody live.
I will definitely look into that. Telling people that religious abuse makes you more likely to experience domestic violence in your future relationships is my theory. I think it's a very strong theory, personally. I think it's
currently an unproven hypothesis.
Yeah, but I think I've shown in this episode how it matches everything else that we do know to be true about domestic violence. And I think that people who have been in the religious trauma, religious recovery, deconstruction world for any amount of time will see that there is definitely a correlation here. I would recommend, so Becoming Allies is still on my recommended list. Also, A Well-Trained Wife by T. Lovings. They're both on my source list, but I'm trying to do my source list from memory.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. Next week we're going to be back. We're going to be talking about Christian nationalism. We were supposed to talk about that 2 weeks ago, but didn't do it because
important things came up.
Different, like the T-Rod thing blew up, and so that episode got pushed back by a couple weeks, and so we're going to talk about it then, and then we're going to get into our fall things we're talking about in September, which I think should be pretty interesting. We got the Joe Duggar trial. I believe that's going to be starting in September. So,
no, not another. Don't make me do another Duggar trial.
Dude, we got to do another Duggar trial. I hope he pleads on this one. If he pleads out on this one, then yeah.
Yeah, let's go for it. I would happily do that. I don't want to do another Duggar trial. I'm sure I'll find it interesting, and I'm sure I'll have things to say. It's just the energy.
I agree with you.
To do another Duggar trial.
Fully. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You guys have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.